avoid interruptions during the talk. This is our second to last kind of conventional indoor meeting of our bird club season before the summer siesta. So next month, May, we'll be having Kurt Griffin, a professor from UMass, coming in talking to us about wildlife of Botswana. And then, as Derek said, June, instead of having one of these meetings, we're having a picnic at, I think at Arcadia Wildlife Sanctuary. And we'll be announcing the winners of the raffle of those Joe Oliverio framed prints we were just talking about. So, and then we'll have a break for the summer, and I'll work on getting more speakers in for next fall. So, as for tonight, I keep thinking I know all of the kind of, ornithologists and like researchers around here, and there's just too many colleges and too many interesting people around here, and I keep meeting new ones. And so I was at the Hitchcock Center for the Environment, had their fall harvest event several months ago, and I was circulating around there, and I ran into a gentleman who I started talking to and learned he was a professor at one of the local colleges. And in my email announcing tonight's meeting, I called him an ornithologist, which is an oversimplification because he's done research on convict cichlids, and he's done research on, or his students have done research on crayfish. He looked at biomechanics, looked at hormones, given fish estrogen and given juncos testosterone, and all kinds of fascinating things. And tonight he's not talking about any of that, or at least that's not the main headline tonight. So, I guess maybe I'll let him say what the headline is tonight. So, Amherst College's Professor Ethan Clotfelter.
Okay, great. So I feel like I might need to give some context to me giving hormones to animals. That seems a little bit like mad science, but I promise that there was a really good reason at the time, which I'm happy to talk about afterwards. I'm not going to talk about any of that today, but I did have a really good reason at the time. This microphone thing, I'm hearing a lot of loud sounds. Hopefully it's not too bad for you out there. Okay. I tend to talk loud, so if I get really excited, I might start to amplify, and then you can just kind of tell me, like, hey, tone it down a little bit. So thanks for having me. Ethan Clotfelter from Amherst College. I've been here in Amherst for 21 years and studying birds off and on for that entire time, and this is my first opportunity to be here, so thanks for having me. I do just want to say, because I don't think I've ever met a lot of you before, I have a stutter. It does not bother me at all. It's going to come up during this talk. It happens. I love talking. I'll just keep on talking. I just don't want any of you all to feel at all awkward, because I'm not feeling awkward about it at all. So I always explain that to my students, and it kind of makes, I think it makes everyone feel more, relaxed, because then otherwise they avoid that sort of thing where they feel like they have to look at the floor. So I wonder if I can just not use the mic behind.
Handheld, that'll be better with speakers.
Sure. Yeah. Handheld will be fine. Sorry about that. Oops. Okay. Thank you. Yes, I'll try that. See how it goes. All right. So I'm going to be talking today. I have this this title here, Birds in a Warming World. I chose this title in part because I was trying to figure out what I was going to talk about, and I'm going to talk about three or four or five projects that are all kind of only connected through this theme of temperature. And so it's not really explicitly a talk about climate change. I'm going to come back to that at the end, but I'm sort of just going to talk a little bit about how temperature affects birds' lives. And so I'm going to begin, at the beginning by talking about all the amazing students that I've had. These are just a few of them. Some of you may know Sam. He was pretty involved in birding here in the area. Absolutely astonishing young aspiring scientist and birder. But I've had a lot of great students, and a few of them are still studying birds as their job, and a lot of them come through and they get excited about birds, and then they go on and do other things. But these are just a few of them who have really kind of been the engines that have powered all the work that I've been doing at Amherst College for over 20 years. So I'm going to start off with a couple of slides that I show a lot of my intro classes in biology, and this is one you've probably seen some version of this maybe in high school biology, that we have animals that are endothermic, or what we would call warm-blooded, and we have animals that are ectothermic that we might call cold-blooded, and across a range of temperatures here on the bottom, if you're endothermic, then you tend to always be warm, and if you're ectothermic, then you tend to track whatever the environmental temperature is. And so things like birds and mammals are endothermic, and so they tend to maintain a fairly high body temperature across a whole range of ambient temperatures. But what also happens if you're an animal like a bird or a mammal is that you lose heat, and you tend to lose heat across, well, I guess all over your body, across your skin, your extremities especially. And one of the consequences of this is that if you are a large animal, like a large bird, like an ostrich, for example, you have a fairly high amount of volume for the amount of skin that you have. But if you're a small animal, like a hummingbird, you have a lot more external surface area for your volume than you would if you were large. So the consequence of this is that if you're small, you lose a lot more heat across your skin. All right, and so basically, I'm only mentioning this because, as it'll hopefully convey to you, a temperature affects every aspect of an animal's biology, but this is particularly true for small animals. They are ruled by temperature. And so what I'm going to be talking about today are two small birds that I've spent a fair amount of time studying. And it's really, I have to say, I always tell my students, especially in the case of chickadees, it's a miracle that chickadees still are alive. Right? Because we're talking about a bird that weighs about as much as a ping pong ball, and yet is able to survive and live each night, hopefully live each night, and survive into the following day. And we'll speak more about that here in a minute. Okay, so I'm going to begin just by mentioning a few of the sort of adaptations that you have if you're a chickadee in terms of, again, in terms of cold tolerance, right? So if you're on a chickadee, you maintain a fairly high body temperature, but every night you go into a controlled hypothermia. You actually become hypothermic every night. In the wintertime, you shiver all night long. It just sounds exhausting to me to be a chickadee, I gotta say. You lose up to 10% of your body mass every single night. And then, and you also do this thing where your feet kind of freeze and your body stays warm. And then in the morning, you have to get up and you have to eat a third to a half of your body weight every single day just to make it to the next day. So this is kind of amazing in and of itself, but this is not actually what I'm going to talk about. What I'm going to talk about instead are some of the behavioral ways in which birds are interacting with the environment, in particular, in terms of temperature. Okay, so I'm going to talk about parts of all of these. I may decide at some point that I'm going on too long, and I promise I won't make it go on forever. At some point I'll say, okay, I'm going to skip these slides, but I'm going to try to talk about parts of these. These are just a few. This is not an exhaustive list of the ways in which birds and temperature interact. And so, and I will jump a little bit between tree swallows and chickadees as I tell this story, or this series of stories. So, sorry. Okay, we're good. All right. So I'm going to start off talking about where birds nest, and I'm going to start off telling the story on tree swallows. I've been studying tree swallows in this area for about 20 years. So to orient you, for folks who know Amherst, 116 is right there. South Pleasant Street, Route 9 is right there. The bike path is right there. And if you ever walked out into this field, or if you've driven by this field, maybe you've driven up and down here and seen a bunch of bird boxes out there. There are 110 bird boxes that I've been checking and maintaining for the past 20 years. Unfortunately, I just learned that this area here is all overgrown now, so I may only have about 100 bird boxes of the current year at least. And so, again, I'm going to start off talking a little bit about how does temperature affect where birds nest. And so one of the first things that we notice when we look at tree swallows over the 20 years that we've been studying them is that they don't use the boxes equally. Right? So this is a heat map showing where birds in this array of 110 boxes, where they tend to nest, and you'll see there are some places that they tend to avoid, gaps in here and here, and some places that they really tend to favor. And so one of the things we're interested in is sort of what are birds interested in terms of boxes, right? The boxes are all the same geometry and height, but one of the things we did the very first year that we started this study is we went out and we took 110 boxes and we tossed a coin every time in terms of where we were going to orient our boxes, right? So we just decided, okay, this is going to be north, south, east, or west. We did a coin toss or a series of coin tosses, and we put it in the ground and said done. And so one of the things we were interested in is, does the orientation, and by that I mean the opening of the box, does that have any impact on whether birds like those boxes or not? And it turns out it does, all right? So if you look in the upper left here for you, this is just, each of these is a cardinal direction, north, east, south, and west. And you see that particularly birds who arrive early in the season, so this is, our early arriving birds in May, they're the ones who get the first pick of the boxes. They tend to favor the boxes that are facing south and east. Birds who come later, they don't have as many options left, but it's also a lot warmer, all right, for the birds who arrive in June. They tend to not have any strong preferences, but we notice that these birds have a strong preference for east and south-facing boxes, and we think this is because these boxes tend to be warmer, all right? And again, maybe not a big deal in June and July, but birds that arrive in May, it can still get quite cold. So we think, and it's still a little bit speculative, but we think that this box orientation is a huge factor driving which boxes are chosen. So the next thing I want to talk about is how birds incubate their eggs. And this is where I was speaking earlier with someone about the role of experimentation in these kinds of studies. I study birds in the field, but I really want to sort of understand what's really going on, and so I feel like an important part of that is to actually do experiments where there are controls and there are things that I'm doing to birds, at least within the realm of what is ethical. And so I'm going to talk about a couple of those experiments here. But I'm interested now in sort of incubation and how it is affected by temperature. Okay, so that's what I was just saying. Observational studies can only tell us so much. We actually need to go a little bit further, I believe. Okay, so what we wanted to do here is we wanted to sort of ask the question about, okay, if we change the environment, if we make it a little warmer or a little colder, what does that do to the incubation behavior of the birds? So we came into this experiment really with strong ideas. We were convinced that if we made it warmer, then that was going to make the birds' life so much easier. They were going to have all of this spare time because we were going to essentially do the work for them and keeping the eggs warm, and they were going to go and they were going to do whatever they would do if they weren't incubating eggs. They were going to go off and fly around and get a lot of extra food and find other mates and things like that. So that was our idea going in. You can tell I'm already setting this up for failure, right? So we did a very convoluted experiment in which we installed heaters on about half of the boxes out there. Actually, we installed heaters on all the boxes, but we only turned them on half of them. And I should also say that we wanted to do the other experiment, which seems obvious as well, of cooling the nest, but we thought we'd start with heating. We weren't sure if cooling was going to be too challenging for the birds. So we said, let's heat first, let's see how that goes. So we installed heaters on these each box, and we ran them off of on a large battery. We were really strong by the end of the summer. We were carrying these batteries because the batteries had to be swapped out every other day. We had to be walking out in the field, 120 boxes. It was exhausting, but what we got, so this is what it actually looks like inside the box. So this line here in blue is the ambient temperature, and the line in red, that's all jaggedy, is what the internal box temperature was. The reason why it was so jaggedy is that the only way we can make the experiment work is if the heater runs for only a quarter of an hour, and then it turns off. So it heats up, and then it turns off, and then it heats up again, and turns off, and it does that continuously for a few days. And this was all done during the incubation stage. You can see here that we actually heated these nests up a fair amount, so we actually got them about 6.5 degrees above ambient temperature. So they were quite snug in there, I think. And so then we wanted to know how did this affect incubation, the actual behavior of the birds, as well as the actual egg temperatures. Now, I did not want to sit out there. Incubation is really boring to study because birds sit on the nest 80% of the time for up to 2 weeks. And so I didn't want to sit out there and have to watch an empty foxhole for 8 hours a day for 2 weeks. So we came up with a way that we were going to follow this. So we installed, let's see if I can do this over here. So this is what we use to actually measure the ambient temperature in the box, and this is what we use to measure the actual temperature that the eggs are experiencing. And then we decided that this wasn't good enough, so we built a fake egg and ran a wire through it. So now we have a fake egg that has the same internal consistency of actual eggs. So we have 2 ways of measuring what the eggs are experiencing, and then we also know what's going on inside the box. And through this, we can look at what the birds are doing. We can tell when the bird is sitting on the eggs or off the eggs, and we can do this for the entire up to 2 weeks if we wanted to. All right, so you can see here clearly, there's a bird, is on the eggs here, it heats up, and then it sits there for a little while, and then it decides it needs to go out and feed, and then it hops off, and then the eggs cool down. One thing I should say is that in tree swallows, the female is the only incubator, so she's doing all the work. The male sits on top of the box and doesn't really do much. He watches out in case there's any danger, but she's doing all the work. So when she gets hungry, she has to get up off the eggs and has to go find food. All right, we don't need to talk about that. Okay, this is not, oh my gosh, sorry. Still good over there? Still good, okay. So, as I mentioned before, we were convinced that when we heated these boxes that the birds were going to go off and have all this spare time to go do other things. When we heated the boxes, they spent more time in the boxes. They love these nice cozy boxes, and so this is our preheating treatment, this is during the heating. Even after heating treatment was over, after we turned the heaters off, they were like, we're waiting for the heat to come back on. They were hanging out in the boxes all the time, hoping that the heat was going to come back on. But basically, this really kind of said, okay, we don't know what's going on. The birds really like getting these warm boxes. We thought we were going to give them a break from incubating, but they sat there longer. Not surprisingly, because we're heating the boxes and because they're incubating more, the eggs got warmer. The eggs stayed warmer when they were on the eggs, and the eggs stayed warmer even if they were off the eggs. So basically, the eggs are doing great. The eggs are super happy. They're warm all the time. Mom is super happy. She's sitting in this warm box. Everyone seems to be happy. Then we wanted to know, okay, so if we made their lives somehow easier, what effect is this having both on the moms and then sort of indirectly on the kids? So we then had to catch the moms both before and after this experiment, and we did sit, unlike watching incubation, which is really boring, it's a little bit more interesting to watch chicks being fed, because at least there's activity. So we did sit out for hours and hours in our lawn chairs watching birds go back and forth to the boxes. I did have a walkie-talkie with all of my students, and I could see if they were falling asleep in their lawn chair, and I would say, hey, it's time to wake up. Sorry, I'm really an active walker here. Okay, And we also did an experiment, and I want to sort of reassure you that we thought about this long and hard, and we did a lot of work leading up to it, which made us think that this was going to be an okay thing to do. We also, because we were really interested in what the impacts would be of having your nest warmed during incubation, we really wanted to, again, to get at this experimentally. So we did a cross-fostering experiment where we took chicks who had been reared in a warmed nest, and we swapped them with chicks that had been reared in sort of a control nest. So that's indicated here by the reds and the blues, because we really wanted to know what was, if there were any effects, what was the effect? Was it coming from the environment in which you were reared, or was it coming from the environment in which you were incubated, or the environment in which you were fed as a nest? And you'll see in a second why this comes into play. I should also say that if anyone has any questions, as I go, I'm pretty informal, so feel free just to. Yeah, please go ahead.
So why was your initial, before observing anything in this experiment, why was your initial idea that if you warm the egg boxes, they would fly up?
Yeah, our initial idea, because the female is the sole incubator, right? Any time that she's incubating is time that she's not feeding. I think in other species where the male and female alternate, we wouldn't necessarily have that same prediction. But because she does all the work, we were pretty convinced that if we did some of the work for her, that she would use that time to go feed. But that's not what we saw. If there's anything else right now?
Yeah. Did you continue eating the box after they were hatched?
We did not. So this is only for a few days during incubation. And as you'll see in a second, we were kind of astounded to see that there were effects that still continued long after the heating had stopped. Okay. So, interesting thing, again, I think this is interesting, hopefully you all do too. Interesting thing that we saw was that in the heated boxes, the females who were doing all the work actually were in better shape as a result of the heating, right? So even though they weren't going off and feeding more, the sort of energetic boost that we gave them through this heating meant that they were overall on a better condition. In birds, we often measure conditions sort of weight as a function or size, weight as a function of size, and so they were heavier, which for birds is good. We also found that the females who had this energetic help during incubation, this is like several days later. This is up to 2 weeks later. They're still feeding their chicks at a higher rate. So the heating part has long since stopped, but they were really kind of fueled by that energetic boost, and they keep feeding at a higher rate. Okay, so now here's the part of the whole cross-fostering experiment. It's a little bit confusing, but we were interested in, we have our control nests and our heated nests, and we have our, whether the nest of origin or the nest that you were swapped into. I think I'm just going to kind of show all these things here, and I'm just going to kind of talk through it. Basically, this is again, this y-axis here is the quality of the chicks. So a higher value means you're in good shape, in good health, and a lower value means you're a little undernourished. And so what we found is that if the box that you came from, your box of origin, was heated, then you were in better shape, especially early on. By the end of the time, this is again 3 weeks after the heating has been turned off, all right? Now you're in better shape if the box that you were swapped into had been heated. So if the female who's feeding you was one who got one of these energetic lifts, right? She's feeding you at a higher rate, and now you're a much heavier chick. I think a short version of all this is that we find these really interesting effects of heating that last for weeks after the heating has actually ended. So something that happens in that early life stage of these birds has carryover effects that last for at least a few weeks, if not longer. Okay. This was then the opposite experiment. We decided that we were going to cool the nests. It doesn't have the same kind of jaggedy look in this particular graph, but we cooled nests almost as much as we heated them. I'm not going to say nearly as much about the cooling, but I can tell you basically everything was in the opposite direction. Cooling is not good, and again, a little bit counterintuitive here. We thought that if we cooled the eggs, we were making it harder for the female to keep the eggs warm. We were convinced that she would say, oh no, my eggs are cold, I need to spend more time incubating them, right? What she actually spends is she says, no, this box is really cold, I'm gonna get out of here and go find something to eat. She actually spends less time incubating when we cool the nest. All very confusing. Okay, maybe I'll just pause again and see if there's other questions about that here before I go and speak about something else. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, that's an excellent question. So I didn't talk about the male at all, did I? Let me just go back to
the male doesn't incubate at all. You told us that much.
Yes, right. So he is not involved at all in incubation, but he is very actively involved in feeding the chicks. What I can tell you is that the females in these experiments, they are impacted by whether or not they were warmed or not during incubation. The male's behavior is sort of unchanged. He's feeding at more or less a constant rate. So he's doing his normal thing, but his behavior isn't influenced by his mate's behavior. Yeah. No, the question is about if he stays longer, if it's heated. His behavior during the incubation stage totally unaffected. He just sits on top of the box and kind of, he keeps a lookout. He doesn't really do anything else. During the active period of feeding, he feeds. He contributes his share, but he doesn't feed any more or less based on whether the eggs have been heated.
This is when the chicks are hatched out from the movement. They end up being healthy and rural.
So I wish I totally had the answer to that. They stay in the nest until about day 20. We don't feel like we can safely go to the nest after day 13 because they could fledge prematurely. So this is all we know. Basically, after day 13, we can observe them, but we can't get in there to handle them without the risk of premature fledging. So I wish I knew the answer to that, about what happens in that week after this, so I can tell you that they all leave the nest, because we do go in and check afterward to make sure there aren't any who had died. So we can tell you that they all leave, but I can't necessarily tell you how big they were at the time of leaving. Okay. I'm going to tell you one short story now about how temperature affects what birds eat. And all the work that I spoke about up till now is a little bit older. It's been out for a while. This is work that was just published in January, and it's a little bit of a different direction. It's just going to be a short story. So, tree swallows and other aerial insectivores are in decline, and especially tree swallows here in New England. And there are a lot of possible factors that have been discussed, all of the usual suspects, right? Habitat change, pesticides, but the ones that I'm going to talk about only briefly are both aerial insects in decline, which are their main food, but also sort of more harder for us to understand, but probably equally important, is that when those insects are available is changing. So because of warmer and warmer springs, insects are emerging earlier and earlier, and this mismatch means that the peak of insect emergence is no longer happening at the time when the chicks are hatching. And so this is something which has been studied a lot in Europe and is now being studied a little bit more here. This is just a graph I stole from someone else's paper, just showing again this sort of peak of insect emergence happening earlier than the peak of chicks hatching. And so I joined a group of people who all study tree swallows, and we all decided that in order to really understand swallows, we needed to understand their food. And so we started a couple years ago doing these insect trapping efforts. And this is now, we actually have a name, all right? North American Insect Abundance Network. This is a map showing the study sites that are all part of this. We've now added another 100 and some, so we're up to 220 people. Almost all of us got into it because we're interested in tree swallows, but now we sort of added a bunch of people who are actual entomologists who actually know things about insects, and we're all running these insect traps, trying to sort of get a better understanding of both insect abundance and insect timing. And so I'm just going to tell you one little bit about this, all right? So one of the things that we found in this paper was that, sort of unsurprisingly, I guess you would probably say, is that as it gets warmer during the course of the spring and into the summer, that there's more insects. So as we trapped our insects every day, we went and cataloged them and weighed them and ID'd them, and we see that across these 4 zones, west and central, northeast, and southeast, that across all the zones you see an increase in insect abundance as it gets warmer during the spring and summer. That's not terribly surprising, probably. But one of the things that we went into this is that we sort of assumed that all of these zones, north, east, southeast, west, and central, would sort of all behave in the same way. We figured that if I'm a tree swallow in the east or the west or the south, that I am going to sort of experience life in more or less the same way. And we paid a special attention in our insect samples to a group called Nematoceras, which are important for a couple reasons. One is that they are favorite food of swallows, in part because they have high concentrations of polyunsaturated fats, really important for the chicks as they develop. We like the fact that they eat these because this group includes things that annoy us. So if you didn't already know this, you should really thank a tree swallow next time you see one. But what we found here is that these different geographic areas kind of behaved in different ways, right? So that's one kind of takeaway here, is we see that whether you're in the northeast or southeast, or central or west, what you can expect to see in terms of insects in this group is going to be vastly different. The other thing I just wanted to highlight here is that in at least 3 of these zones, we see that the peak of these insects is happening at the beginning of the season, right? So on this x-axis here, this is May 1st, and I'm going into June. So in a lot of these zones, your peak of these insects is at the beginning, and it's getting earlier. So we do see at least some possible potential for a mismatch between when insects are available and when the chicks are hatching. These chicks, tree swallows, at least around here, tend to be hatching in mid-June. Okay. Great, I think I'm good. I got one more story. Okay, right. And then I was just going to say, this is the thing I was already saying here before. Right, I have my last little story to tell, so I think I'm good time-wise. I've got okay, great. And this is, again, kind of unrelated. I'm hoping I'm somehow convincing you that these things are all kind of connected, but this is a different story. This is about how does temperature affect how and with whom birds spend a time with. And in order to do this, we started working on chickadees. And again, as I already mentioned, oh no, as I hadn't already mentioned, this is what I was going to say. This is where we study our chickadees. So here was our swallow study area down here, Amherst College campus up here, and this is a little wood lot that we've been studying them for the past couple of years. And again, I already mentioned this all before, all of our physiological adaptations that we know that chickadees have in terms of cold tolerance, but we went into this interested to know how they respond kind of behaviorally to cold. And again, this is going to sound like, boy, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. We had a really strong prediction that turned out not to be true. We were convinced that because these birds form flocks, and the flocks often, we think, share information about finding food, we were convinced that when it got really cold, these flocks were going to be much more cohesive and kind of band together. And then when it was warm and everything was good, they were going to like, I don't need to hang out with a flock, I can go find my own food. So that was our prediction. We were like, okay, we're really, really convinced that there's going to be more group cohesion on cold days. So again, I didn't want to sit around and watch birds for thousands and thousands of hours at bird feeders. So we set up special bird feeders. We tagged our birds, and if you are have an astute eye, you can see that's not a chickadee there, but this is just to show the tag. We use these special RFID tags that gives each bird a unique code, and then we have a special feeder. I gotta tell you, I did battle with the squirrels for 3 years before we figured out how to make this thing squirrel-proof. Because it has the cage, I thought the cage was gonna be enough, right? But the squirrels and chipmunks can squeeze through the cage. So then in year two, we put a covering over the cables that has capsaicin in it. So, squirrels don't like it, birds can't, I can't taste it. Squirrels didn't care. Squirrels chewed right through it. So year 3, we used a steel cable covering. So we finally after 3 years, excluded the squirrels. But we have a special feeder where when the bird lands, if it has an RFID tag, it lands on the antenna right here and feeds, and the tag sends a ping down through the cables to the computer on the bottom and says, hey, I'm bird QZ397. And so it's great because what happens in an ideal world, there are always, with anything, there are always a few technical problems, but in theory, in the fall, you go out and band a bunch of birds, and then you sit back, put the coffee on, and for the next 3 months, you get tens of thousands of hits as these birds all come to the feeders. And you can get a lot of information just by sort of who's feeding where, who's feeding with whom. You can kind of see who's scaring whom off of the feeder, so you can get a lot of information. So we were interested again in how does extreme cold, although we haven't had a lot of extreme cold, but how does extreme cold affect how these birds spend their time? And so we did, I had a student who was very quantitatively inclined, which is great. She says, I really want to learn how to do social network analysis. I said, great, you go learn how to do that and you come and tell me how to do it. So that's what she did. And so what you'll see here is we'll see that every circle here is a node. This is an individual. This is actually like an interesting approach that you can apply to lots of different fields of study, but we applied it to birds, so every bird is a node, and then in between each node is an edge. And the edge, if it's really thick, it means that those two birds spend a lot of time together, and if it's very thin, it means those birds are very indirectly connected. And so this is what sort of a typical graph looks like. These are each of these are flocks, all right? And you can see that there are some birds who have lots of connections and large nodes and are very closely connected. And then you can see there are some birds who are kind of more off on their own. Interestingly, there are some birds, and this is always kind of fun. So you look at this and you're like, wow, this is really cool. This bird here has friends in several different flocks. This bird over here, I don't know what's going on with this bird over here. This bird over there is kind of all by themselves. They have like the occasional friend, all right? But then you have a lot of other birds that are highly connected, very cohesive. So we were essentially asking, like, do these flocks, we expected when it was cold that the flocks would be highly cohesive. And we expected when it was warm, they would be all, loose and relaxed. And I also just say that you can get lots of data from this. So this is just a chunk of time, 100,000 plus hits. Last year we got 400,000 altogether for all the birds. So it's great, you get a lot of information. Okay, but you can tell that I'm headed for like the absolute wrong direction here. So we asked, are chickadees more social when it's cold? We looked at the warmest and coldest days of each month, and this is in the winter of 2021 and 2022, and the answer is no. So in fact, what happened is that the birds fed more when it was warm, and they were more social. Again, it's a little bit hard to know what all these things mean, but basically a higher value here means that those connections were stronger on the warm days compared to the cold days. I don't know what anything means anymore. Part of this, at least, is that we think that on the cold days, the birds are just hunkering down and not getting up early. So this is a graph of a cold day. These are, it's a little hard to see this, but it's very hard to see it. It's a little hard, somewhere back in there. Maybe you all can see it better than me. This is a curve right here. It might not show up. There's a curve right here. This is what it looks like for a chickadee. So they actually are not the first birds up in the morning. The first birds up in the morning are in these flocks are the up to titmice. They're the early birds who get to the feeders first. On our chickadees are a little bit slow to get up. There are a few of them who get up, and then a lot of them don't get up until much later. But especially on cold days, so they tend to sleep in, and they tend to not feed very much, and they tend not to be very socially connected on these cold days. Okay, so I have told you a little bit about all of these things, not everything. I haven't talked at all about when and where. Birds migrate, but that'll have to be some other day. I just want to kind of conclude here and try to talk a little bit about what we predict based on this about sort of how birds are going to change in a warming world.
Got a question.
Oh, yes, I'm so sorry.
That's okay, hold on. I'm wondering, how is it that the chickadees are surviving if they're losing all that body weight and they're not eating as much and they're not probably huddled together?
So we are in the process of looking at other data about the interactions between the chickadees and the titmice. And what we're finding is that they are almost polar opposites in terms of which feeders they're using. So this is just something which I just learned in the past couple of days because I have a student who's analyzing all this data. One possible explanation is not that they're not trying to feed, but they're being excluded, at least from our feeders, by this big spike in tufted titmice. They are the ones who are out there first, and they're bigger, and they're tougher. And so that's one possible explanation. It could just be that they're conserving more energy just by kind of staying all fluffed up and perched at home, right? They still go and feed, for sure, right? But they're just not necessarily, at least here, they aren't necessarily feeding first thing in the morning. And it could be that they don't need to necessarily feed with all their friends, right? They don't necessarily need to get information as much as we thought they did by being in a flock, but we're still trying to figure it out. All I know is that they still do survive. Okay. So in terms of what we can predict based on what I've told you about, I think I don't really know what to predict in terms of tree swallows in temperature, all right? So I've told you a little bit about how elevated, at least inside the box, if it's warmer, there seem to be lots of benefits in terms of offspring development, in terms of energetics for the incubating females, so there may be a few benefits there, but I'm guessing that these are likely going to be completely offset if there's no food available at the time, right? So it may be that there are some energetic benefits of higher temperature, but if you have a mismatch of your main food items, then that's all going to be all offset and lost. In terms of the chickadees, it's a little unclear about what we can expect to see as we have increasingly warm temperatures. One thing that I think might happen is that the flock structure might be really different, right? So we expect to see flocks that are fairly structured and sort of independent, and we're seeing instead a lot of birds that have friends in other flocks and are feeding with other individuals, and they tend not to necessarily flock as much when it's warm. So it could be that we have a little bit of a breakdown of kind of the classic flock structure. What the implications of that are, I'm not quite sure, right? It could affect how information is shared among birds, and it could also affect spread of disease. So this is still a very sort of unknown area. Actually, they're both really unknown areas, but I think the answer is always going to be it's complicated. Right? So I think that is the end, and I'm happy to answer any other questions. Yeah, please.
Maybe you can explain it. I don't know the knowledge.
Yes, it's the timing of biological processes, and so we can think about phenology of tree flowering or insect emergence or bird breeding. All of those things have their own phenology, and so phenology is just the study of the timing of any kind of a biological process. Here I'm talking about, specifically in the context of the whether the insects and the birds are sort of in sync or not. Sure. Yeah, please.
One might think, coming from total ignorance of anything to do with science, that the change of behavior might happen genetically much faster than, say, having to have a bigger bill or something like that. And if that's true, the birds that come in a little earlier might start to have a lot more success at nesting, and you could imagine a fairly quick environmental change to earlier arrival where the insects are. I'm just wondering, what about, is that nonsense, or is there something?
No, that is absolutely an excellent observation. There's a really great evolutionary story about birds in Germany who began to show up in the UK when they should have been going south to Africa, to Spain and to Africa. And it happened, started happening in the 1960s, and by the 1990s, 10 or 15% of the population in Germany was going to the UK to spend its winters. And what they figured out is that, not surprisingly, it takes those birds much less time to come back in the spring. So in the spring, the birds who went to the UK are all back first. And when they're looking around for mates, the ones that are around for mates are also the birds who went to the UK. So they found that pretty quickly, and they also found that there is a sort of a genetic basis for the orientation. So birds who fly out of Germany, who fly to the west to go to the UK, there's a sort of a gene or genes for that. And so basically, the answer to your question is yes, it's totally possible that in fairly short period of evolutionary time, that you could have something like this that would be highly beneficial to be the first ones back, say, in the spring, and that might spread quickly in the population if there is a genetic basis of that behavior. So I think it's absolutely plausible. Yeah, please.
Questions related to the nest site orientation of the tree swallows.
Mm-hmm.
One is, are there any observations observations on real life sites, like beaver swamps and so on.
I was worried someone was going to ask me about that. So I can partially answer your question. There are a lot of studies looking at other aspects of clutch size and feeding behavior and incubation behavior, comparing nests and cavities, tree cavities to those in boxes. And most of them found that most of the studies found that those kind of parameters are the same. In terms of the orientation specifically, I don't know the answer, but I do know that a lot of the other aspects of a tree swallow biology are fairly accurately represented even in a nest box.
The other question is, do you have any idea on what the approximate information is that the tree swallows are using? Are they looking at the heat of the different the boxes, different orientations? Are they looking at light levels, or do they know more from south and west?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. I know that there's a lot of early season inspection of boxes. So they'll go and they'll hang out in the box for a day, for a night. We found some that will spend the night in the boxes. So I really feel like they kind of try them out a little bit. I would guess that it just that they're able to actually sense whether. I'm guessing that they're just able to sense if it's warmer or not. I don't know. Yeah, I think that's all I can say about that. I think that they do go around and they spend time in boxes in the early season. Once you get to the middle part of the season, time is of the essence, and they will go and they'll construct a nest in a day. In the early season, they'll take a week or 2 weeks to experiment around with a nest. They'll stop and go elsewhere. So all I can guess is that they're actually going and spending time there and seeing what's warmer. Yeah, please. Yeah.
Did the heat have any effect on like the lice and stuff that get in the nest?
So we didn't look at it during that experiment. I started a couple of years ago looking at lice and mites and the blowflies, but after I had finished doing the heating experiment. So I am collecting data now, trying to get enough years of data where I can try to tell you an answer to the question about ectoparasites on a temperature, but I don't have enough data yet. But we are going, at the end of every year, we collect the whole nest, and the student who draws the short straw goes and has to put on a face mask and gloves and pull it apart, bit by bit, and count all the parasites in the nest. So we are getting that information, but slowly. Yeah, please.
Did you test for whether there's a certain temperature that would be detrimental in terms of thinking about global warming? Is there a certain temperature that you found is not?
We didn't, but it is pretty known. I'm this. I think eggs can tolerate, I want to say 35 degrees C for extended periods of time. I should know the answer to that, but it's around there. But we wanted to make sure that we were well away from that. We were not going for anything that was going to approach the point where eggs get cooked, obviously. So we did some trial experiments with our heaters, and we found that they would keep about 5 or 6 degrees above ambient, and that seemed to be well within the range of tolerance of the bird eggs. Yeah, please.
Just the question of why they choose the orientation that they choose, is that a study in itself that has been done? You see what I mean? Like how much time was spent watching the birds do when they're coming up and they say, oh, here's a box. I see a hole, you go to the hole. or they have to go past the box and look back and over the hole, all the back. I mean, how much study was done on why did they choose the boxes? Because you say that they spend time and they hang around them, but like, how do they reach the point? How do you go from the board?
Yeah. I tried to attach transmitters onto the swallows, and I did for about 20 of them, but that was part of a different study. I would love to know the answer to that. You can do, I should say, if I were going back in time, I would go back in time and I would install the same RFID antennas that I was talking about for the chickadees. You can do that around the whole of the swallow nest. You put a little wire antenna, and then you could, if you could go out and tag all of your swallows, you could have every single box rigged with a wire around it, and you would know when any bird went in any box. It's a daunting amount of work that I haven't done yet, but that would totally answer your question. Yes, so yes, to answer your question, there like absolutely is a way that you could do that. It would be fascinating to know. I haven't done it yet. It is also, I will say, it's really hard to get those RFID tags on the legs of swallows. I don't know if anyone's ever, they have short little legs. There's not much space there to work with, but it is possible. I just haven't done it yet. Yeah, please.
Question from the people online. Do any other birds take over the boxes?
We are very fortunate. We have every year in those 110 boxes, we have 2 or 3 pairs of bluebirds who start first. Then we have our swallows who come in, and they occupy 80 or so of the boxes. And then we have our house wrens that are around the edge. And the house wrens, there's like usually one incursion every year. 1 or 2 nests of the swallows get punctured by the house wrens. But everyone seems to get along. There are no house sparrows, no starlings. So, as of now, I have 110 boxes. I've got 85 pairs of swallows happily existing. I've got 20 pairs of house wrens almost happily existing, and everyone seems to do fine. Yeah, please.
So I've been doing Christmas count there for 30 years. So,
great. Oh gosh, I'd love to know more.
But so this winter I was in the field, and there's at least 30 bluebirds, but they're all on different boxes, and they're all feeding from the boxes to the bluebirds. Do you only have a few pairs there?
Yeah, and yes, I've seen the same thing. I see a lot out there. I'm not sure where they go. There are, I should also say that I don't know the whole answer to this. Let me just, sorry, I'm going to go back a lot of slides here if you want to, oh, right, this is good. So, this is where we do our study, but there are boxes all around here. And I used to run boxes all of in here. I don't know if the boxes are still there. I don't check them anymore, but I put boxes. I first started here in 2004, and I put up over 200 boxes in the whole area. But then I decided I just couldn't cover all that ground, so I shrunk our study area just down to here. So part of the answer is that maybe there's things going on over here and around here that I'm just not tracking in terms of bluebirds. But I don't think we've ever had more than 3 or 4 pairs actually build nests. Yeah, please. The swallows or the
chickadees?
Yeah, so
the question was whether the chickadees change their feeding locations from day to day, or do they return to the same place?
The flocks move around a fair amount. So in this area here, we'll have probably 6 flocks, and they will travel around all day. But again, they seem to have some sort of an avoidance of flocks of titmice. So their feeding might be dictated by where the other species is feeding. But in general, the chickadee flocks are gonna, so I've got 10 feeders over this area, and 6 flocks will show up at all 10 feeders at some point. Maybe not all in one day, but in a week, they'll be kind of moving around the whole area. But within a day, I'm not quite sure how many different feeders any specific bird is going to feed at. Yeah, please.
First, I'd like to compliment you. I thought your presentation was
Thank you.
stimulating and
Thank you.
entertaining.
Thank you.
My question is, how did you become, it's not about the bird, it's about you. And how did you become so singularly focused on temperature in your research?
I'm not sure that I am as much as this makes it seem.
Yeah, you didn't talk about the hormones yet.
Yeah, I think, so I have to say, I'm often asked by my students for advice, and I often do the like, do what I say, but not what I do advice, because if you look at my career, I've studied a lot of different things. I'm sort of like whatever the shiny object is at the moment, like, oh, that sounds interesting. And that's part of the why I love my job, because no one tells me to stop doing that. I can do whatever I want. I chose this topic for today because I wanted to tell a story that somehow seemed a little bit cohesive, but I could easily come back and give a talk to you about how crayfish swim and why fish are black and orange and other things. So it just happens to be that I picked a topic and I pulled little bits from the past 20 years that are on that topic. But I have a lot of other interests as well. Probably too many.
Good. How many kids at Amherst College are interested in fish?
How many kids are interested in fish at Amherst College? Fewer than are on my hand. At least at first. I mean, I can get a few of them interested in fish. Every year, I'll have like the one student who's got all the fish tanks at home and things like that. But it's pretty rare. I also have a fish tank in my office, and it's really disgusting. And I can always tell the student who knows something about fish because they'll step into my office and they'll look very judgmentally at the tank. But not a lot of students at Amherst are interested in fish.
There's rare mussels in our Fort River.
Yeah, exactly. Well, right, and then even fewer students at Amherst College were interested in invertebrates, even fewer.
The crawdads, yeah.
Yes, well, I try to give it, yes.
The other thing that's interesting, Amherst College owns all that land.
All of this.
Almost 80% of that.
Yeah, exactly. Any other questions?
Everyone who had questions has asked them, then let's thank Ethan for an excellent work. Have you back in a few years to tell us about the jump goes on testosterone. Okay, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for everyone on Zoom for listening in, and see you all in May when we have Kurt Griffin talking to us. So, good night, everybody.
And I'm still open.
Raffle tickets. Yes, raffle tickets. Joe Oliverio photos. Prairie warbler and bald eagle.